Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on September 27, 2025 for Reason to Resist. Yesterday, the United Nations disgraced itself yet again. This time it did so by giving to an indicted war criminal, Benjamin Netanyahu, a podium at the UN General Assembly to spew yet more genocidal rhetoric. Before I comment further on the General Assembly's decision to allow Netanyahu to speak, let's take a closer look at what happened at the UN yesterday.
Who is addressing the UN General Assembly right now? Let's listen in.
Please, order in the hall.
We're actually walking out of the room as the Israeli Prime Minister is getting ready to speak. This is his chance to address the UN General Assembly after several leaders over the course of the week have called him a war criminal. Let's listen.
Now, as you saw, many UN dignitaries walked out of the room when the genocidal maniac began speaking. Despite this, during this clip and at various points during his speech, you could hear some boisterous applause from the gallery. Well, that applause came mainly from Israel's 7-member UN delegation. At various points during Netanyahu's tirade, the camera panned to the Israeli delegation and showed 7 clapping seals. Netanyahu's speech lasted for approximately 16 minutes. Tellingly, the very first subject that Netanyahu addressed was Iran. In fact, he devoted almost the entire first half of his speech to the Islamic Republic. This is how Netanyahu's speech began.
Last year, I stood at this podium and I showed this map. This map. It shows the curse of Iran's terror axis. This axis threatened the peace of the entire world. It threatened the stability of our region and the very existence of my country, Israel. Iran was rapidly developing a massive nuclear weapons program and a massive ballistic missile program. These were meant not only to destroy Israel, they were meant also to threaten the United States and blackmail nations everywhere. From Gaza, Yahya Sinwar dispatched waves of Hamas terrorists. They stormed into Israel on October 7th and committed acts of unspeakable savagery.
It's really quite amazing how many lies Netanyahu can pack into 70 seconds. First of all, his childish little map, which only a simpleton would take seriously, describes Iran and its allies as the curse. As the indigenous peoples of West Asia know all too well and painfully, the true curse in their midst is Israel. Then Netanyahu stated that the axis of resistance threatened peace in the entire world. In fact, there's zero evidence, I repeat, zero, that the axis of resistance threatens any actors outside of its own region. To the extent it threatens anyone, it threatens the Western militaries and their Zionist proxy, who have brutally imposed their will for decades upon the indigenous peoples of the region. If any actor in the region threatens peace in the entire world, it's the US government and its rabid Israeli attack dog, both of whom possess nuclear weapons and may well be willing to use them to maintain their dominance of the region. Third, Netanyahu said that Iran is developing a massive nuclear weapons program, but this has been debunked repeatedly, including by Western intelligence agencies. If Iran does ultimately develop a nuclear arsenal, it will almost certainly be because the US and Israel left it no choice but to do so to defend itself from their aggression. Now, in my view, the excerpt I just showed you was not the most important part of the war criminal's speech. The most important part, I would suggest, is what he had to say about the need for vigilance.
We moved an existential threat to Iran, to Israel rather, and a mortal threat to the civilized world. We lifted a dark cloud that could have claimed millions and millions of lives. But, ladies and gentlemen, we must remain vigilant. We must remain absolutely clear-minded and vigilant. We must not allow Iran to rebuild its military nuclear capacities. Iran's stockpiles of enriched uranium, these stockpiles must be eliminated. And tomorrow, UN Security Council sanctions on Iran must be snapped back.
Now, one interesting aspect of this excerpt is that Netanyahu implicitly acknowledged that Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium has not, in fact, been destroyed, which is something which notable experts have been saying, including Ted Postel, former professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, almost from the time that the United States and Israel attacked nuclear sites in Iran several months ago. And quite apart from that, it is absolutely crystal clear, because Iran has been unequivocal in saying this, that it will rebuild its nuclear program and it will continue to enrich uranium, as it has a right to do, by the way, under international law. And so when you add that all up, plus the abundant evidence that existed prior to Netanyahu's speech at the UN General Assembly yesterday that Israel intends to resume the war against Iran, I think that we can take away from this speech that a resumption of that war is inevitable, and it may be only a matter of weeks or even days away. Why do I say that? Because a recent development within the Trump regime suggests that the resumption of war may be only a short time away indeed. U.S. media are reporting that Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Secretary of War, and by the way, that is indeed how the Trump regime now describes Hegseth, which is probably more honest, much more so than calling him the Secretary of Defense. But according to U.S. media, Hegseth has called an urgent and extraordinary meeting of hundreds of senior U.S. military officers. According to CNN, quote, hundreds of U.S. generals and admirals around the globe have been called to Virginia for a meeting with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth next Tuesday, several U.S. officials told CNN, although the reason for the meeting is unclear. The meeting is expected to be held at the military installation in Quantico, Virginia, multiple officials said, adding that no one seems to know what the meeting is about, including the general and flag officers themselves, or why it was suddenly added to the calendar. One source familiar said they'd heard theories ranging from a group physical fitness test to receiving a briefing on the state of the Defense Department to a mass firing of officers, but regardless of the reason, the sudden convening of so many senior military officers is highly unusual. CNN goes on to note that some military observers question the wisdom of gathering so many U.S. military leaders in one place. Their concern is that this gathering of so many top U.S. military officials could present a juicy target for a hostile actor. Now, there are all sorts of other theories out there as to why Hegseth is taking this highly unusual step. One is that Hegseth is calling these senior officers to the meeting to oblige them to swear an oath of loyalty to the Donald. Hegseth himself was happy to lend credence to this theory with a post on X. Yesterday, retired U.S. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges posted on X that, quote, in July 1935, German generals were called to a surprise assembly in Berlin and informed that their previous oath to the Weimar Constitution was void and that they would be required to swear a personal oath to the Fuhrer. Most generals took the new oath to keep their positions. Hegseth reposted Hodges' post with this comment, cool story, General. Now, given how Hegseth responded to Hodges' post, it is at least plausible that one purpose of this upcoming meeting is, in fact, to oblige senior U.S. military officers to give an oath of loyalty to Trump. But even if that's true, it does not necessarily mean that that is the only purpose for which this highly unusual meeting has been called. Indeed, the meeting may have several purposes. Another theory is that Hegseth plans to engage in a mass firing of senior military personnel at this meeting. In May of this year, Hegseth ordered a 20% reduction in the number of four-star officers in the U.S. military, deepening cuts at the Pentagon that have shaken the Department of Defense at the start of Trump's second term. Hegseth has long been a vocal critic about the senior-most ranks of the military, which he views as being bloated. Nonetheless, this theory seems implausible to me because Hegseth doesn't need to assemble all these officers physically in one place and take the attendant security risks of doing so in order to fire them. He could simply send out dozens of termination letters to the targeted officers. And by the way, firing them en masse and in person is likely to be considerably more embarrassing to them and likely to generate a lot more resentment than simply sending to them privately a letter of termination. So in my view, when I add it all up, the theory that makes the most sense is the one that the administration is saying nothing about, not even through orchestrated leaks to the press, namely that the Trump regime has decided to resume a full-scale war on Iran. Obviously, if that is its intention, it will try, notwithstanding its grotesque incompetence, to tamp down speculation that such a war is coming so that Iran is not prepared for it when it comes. To preserve some element of surprise, the Trump regime would likely try to distract the world with other theories about the purpose of this meeting. Some have also speculated that the main target of the Trump regime at this time is not Iran, but Venezuela. That too is certainly plausible given what's going on in the Caribbean, the outright murder of civilians who are alleged without proof by the Trump regime of being narco-terrorists. But it seems to me less plausible that the primary target of the Trump regime and the reason for this meeting at this time is a plan to launch a full-scale or perhaps even limited war on Venezuela. And why do I say that? I say that because it's hard to see why Hegseth would summon U.S. military officers from regions as far away as West Asia, the Southern Pacific, or Eastern Europe to talk about a war on Venezuela. Iran is a much more challenging target for the U.S. military than Venezuela because, first of all, Iran is much further away geographically from the United States and therefore presents far more logistical challenges than Venezuela. To supply major military operations against Iran, it's very likely that the U.S. military would have to draw upon military assets in far-flung parts of the world, whereas given the proximity of Venezuela to the United States, the mainland United States, it's unlikely that the U.S. would have to rely upon far-flung military assets anywhere near to the same degree as it would in a war on Iran. That obviously makes Iran a much more challenging military target than Venezuela. Also, Iran's territory is about twice as large as Venezuela's, and Iran's population is about 3 times as large as Venezuela's. And finally, there's no indication that Venezuela possesses a missile arsenal that is comparable to Iran's missile arsenal, which, as it demonstrated in the 12-day war with Israel, can cause very serious damage to the Israeli regime and U.S. military targets in this vitally important region of the world. Therefore, I think it much more plausible that Hegseth would feel the need to summon military officers from around the world for a discussion about a war of Iran than a discussion about a war on Venezuela. The bottom line is that we may indeed be weeks or even days away from a resumption of the criminal U.S.-Israeli war of aggression on the Islamic Republic. Now, returning to Netanyahu's UN speech, the Israeli war criminal could not resist the opportunity to conclude his speech by castigating and embarrassing those of Israel's Western allies who just recognized the state of Palestine. Have a listen to this.
France, Britain, Australia, Canada, and other countries unconditionally recognized a Palestinian state. They did so after the horrors committed by Hamas on October 7th. Horrors praised on that day by nearly 90% of the Palestinian population. And let me say that again. Nearly 90% of Palestinians supported the attack on October 7th. It's not supported only, they celebrated. They danced on the rooftops. They threw candies. That's both in Gaza and in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, as you call it. And it's just the way they celebrated another horror, 9/11. They danced on the rooftops, they cheered, they threw candy. You know what message the leaders who recognize the Palestinian state this week sent to the Palestinians? It's a very clear message. Murdering Jews pays off. Well, I have a message for these leaders. When the most savage terrorists on earth are effusively praising your decision, you didn't do something right. You did something wrong, horribly wrong. Your disgraceful decision will encourage terrorism against Jews and against innocent people everywhere. It will be a mark of shame on all of you. But wait a minute, Mr. Prime Minister, they tell me. Wait a minute. We believe in a two-state solution where the Jewish state of Israel will live side by side in peace with the Palestinian state. There's only one problem with that. The Palestinians, they don't believe in this solution. They never have. They don't want a state next to Israel. They want a Palestinian state instead of Israel.
No, Netanyahu, the most savage terrorists on earth are not Palestinian militants. The most savage terrorist on earth is you. Now, there are many aspects of this extraordinary tirade that I think merits comment, quite apart from the hypocrisy of Netanyahu, the arch-terrorist, accusing the Palestinians or anybody else of terrorism. For one thing, as you heard, he claimed that 90% of Palestinians celebrated the October 7th attacks. I don't know, frankly, where he's getting that figure, and I would never take his word for it. But let's, first of all, remember that from the Palestinian perspective, the October 7th attacks were not primarily targeting Israeli civilians. The Palestinians on that day, and this is something that the Israelis themselves readily acknowledged, attacked military bases, Israeli military bases that were ringing the Gaza concentration camp. And the Israelis themselves acknowledge that the Palestinian militants killed several hundred Israeli soldiers and military personnel and took a number back to Gaza as prisoners of war, not hostages, in that attack. So to the extent there was celebration, it may well have been the military accomplishments of the Palestinian militants and not directed at any civilian casualties that were sustained on that day. But let's take Netanyahu's logic, the implicit logic of this statement, and apply it to Israel. The logic here, I think Netanyahu quite clearly was trying to generate sympathy for what Israel is doing to the civilian population of Gaza. Well, according to that logic, that celebrating the attacks of October 7th, which he regards purely and entirely as acts of terrorism and not to any degree as legitimate self-defense, even to the extent that they were targeting Israeli military assets. If you apply that logic to Israel, then you would end up with a justification for the mass slaughter of Israeli civilians, because it's very clear from the polling data and an abundant amount of video evidence and social media commentary that a large majority of the population in Israel fully supports and to varying degrees is celebrating what is being done to the civilian population of Gaza. You know, we see polls which show a large majority of Israeli Jews perfectly supportive of the destruction of the Gaza Strip, the annihilation of children, women, the elderly. We've seen videos of Israeli settlers near the Gaza border eating sumptuous meals to mock the civilian population that is starving in Gaza. We've seen multiple videos of Israeli civilians attacking humanitarian aid trucks that are situated along the border of the Gaza concentration camp, waiting to be allowed in. And so the evidence is quite clear that a great many people in Israel, certainly amongst the Jewish population, are celebrating the destruction of the people of Gaza. And if we apply Netanyahu's own logic to their behavior, the Palestinians and other members of the Axis of Resistance would be entitled to wipe out the civilian population, the Jewish civilian population of Israel, as the Israeli Jewish population is doing to the Palestinian people of Gaza, and to the West Bank, I should add. Now, let's be very clear. This is not my logic. I unequivocally reject that logic. I unequivocally condemn all attacks on unarmed civilians, whoever they may be. But this is the logic of Benjamin Netanyahu, and frankly, of a great many people who support the terrorist Zionist entity. Another issue that arises from this last excerpt from Netanyahu's speech is that it constitutes one more piece of evidence that the Israeli leadership has become truly suicidal. Why do I say that? The last thing that the genocidal Israeli entity needs now is to alienate its few remaining allies, who every day are shrinking in number, especially over an action like the recognition of the state of Palestine, which is purely performative. As I've explained in prior episodes, there's no point in recognizing a Palestinian state if there are no Palestinians to actually inhabit that state and govern that state. Gaza has been entirely demolished. The West Bank is now chock full of fanatical and armed Israeli settlers who have absolutely no intention of leaving. It is impossible to imagine a viable Palestinian state being constructed on these occupied territories at this point in time. And that's because Western states have rewarded Israel and supported Israel throughout the time that it has been pummeling Gaza, rendering it uninhabitable, and allowing Israel to build settlements in the occupied West Bank. Now the settlers there number in the range of some 800,000. So this is a purely performative gesture. And if Netanyahu were actually being rational and not suicidal, his criticism of these governments would be at worst muted. But in fact, his language, as you saw, was quite damning. He's effectively accusing them, not effectively, he's openly accusing them of doing something that encourages the murder of Jews, that encourages another Holocaust of the Jewish people. You could hardly level a more damning accusation at the leaders of the countries he mentioned: Britain, Canada, Australia, France, and others. Now, Israel, as any rational person I think can appreciate, should be far more concerned at this time, not with these performative measures, but with the growing willingness of Western states to sanction Israel. Most notable among those Western states is Spain, which recently imposed a total arms embargo on Israel. Spain just announced that it canceled a third arms deal with the genocidal entity. The deal was a $207 million deal to purchase the Rafael Advanced Defense Systems Lightning V system. Rafael describes the Lightning Advanced Targeting Pod as being, quote, the world's most widely used combat-proven targeting and navigation pod, close quote, which excels due to its target detection, recognition, and identification sensors. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that this targeting system was almost certainly developed and rendered more deadly in the field by experimentation on Palestinian civilian targets. And given Israel's decades-long record of crimes against humanity, we ought to ask why Spain entered into this arms deal to begin with. But I suppose that late is better than never, as they say. In addition, Spain, along with Italy, just announced that they have deployed naval vessels to assist the Gaza aid flotilla. This poses a very interesting quandary for these governments because it may well be that the Israelis will not take any meaningful military action against these vessels so long as they are international waters and are accompanied by Spanish and Italian and perhaps other Western naval vessels. But what are these governments going to do when the flotilla reaches the territorial waters of Gaza, which, by the way, Israel has no right in international law to control? At that stage, are they going to continue their journey alongside the civilian vessels carrying humanitarian aid of the Freedom Flotilla, Will they take them all the way to shore? Or are they going to stop accompanying them and allow Israel to inflict whatever extreme violence and other violations of international and human rights that it chooses to employ in response to this extraordinary initiative of dozens of civilian vessels approaching the shores of Gaza all at once? I think we may well be about to witness a turning point in Western relations with the genocidal entity. And that turning point may well have already happened, as I say. One could easily argue that the total arms embargo Spain, a very significant Western country, has imposed upon Israel is a crack in the dam that has been holding back the waters of justice, and that the dam will now burst and the sanctions will come raining down upon Israel. Whether that is going to happen in the near term, I don't know, but I think that that is certainly a possibility given the way things are going. Quite apart with the growing willingness of Western states to sanction Israel and some of those states to accompany the Freedom Flotilla, Netanyahu should also be concerned about plummeting support for Israel in the United States. Quinnipiac University just issued a poll which found that only 47% of voters think supporting Israel is in the national interest of the United States. This compares to Quinnipiac's December 20th, 2023 poll, when 69%, over 2/3 of US voters thought supporting Israel is in the national interest. So in the space of less than 2 years, you've gone from over 2/3 of Americans thinking that it's in the national interest to support Israel to less than 50% thinking that that's the case. The new poll also found that a mere 21% of US voters have a favorable opinion of Netanyahu, while 49% have an unfavorable opinion of him. 28% say they haven't heard enough about the monster to have any opinion at all. I should also remind you that a poll done 1 month ago by Quinnipiac found that 50% of US voters believe Israel is committing genocide. That number may now be significantly higher, especially with the findings of the UN Independent Commission of Inquiry, which I'm going to mention in a moment. Now, as I mentioned at the outset of this report, I am of the view that the UN disgraced itself by allowing Netanyahu to speak. Why? Well, for one thing, Netanyahu was indicted months ago by the International Criminal Court, of which a majority of the UN's member states are participants, for war crimes and crimes against humanity. But even more so, only days before his genocidal ravings, the UN Independent Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territories found, after an exhaustive investigation, that Israel is committing genocide. Accordingly, not only should Netanyahu have been barred from speaking at the UN General Assembly, but Israel should have been expelled from the UN by now. Now, some might say that the real blame for this travesty yesterday lies with the new UN General Assembly president, former German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock. And Baerbock may indeed be the one who is primarily responsible for allowing Netanyahu to speak. After all, this genocidal racist Baerbock enthusiastically supported not only Israel's propaganda, but also the arming of Israel during the first 18 months or so of the genocide, after which the coalition of which her Green Party of Germany was a part was unceremoniously booted from office by German voters. For her grotesque incompetence and moral depravity, Annalena Baerbock was rewarded with this juicy, prestigious post of UN General Assembly president. So even if she is primarily responsible for the decision to allow the war criminal Netanyahu to speak at the UN General Assembly yesterday, the question nonetheless arises: who is responsible for the fact that Annalena Baerbock is now the UN General Assembly president? Well, that would be a majority of the UN member states. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata on September 27, 2025.